She was pregnant and agreed to marry a paralyzed millionaire who bought her fate. What he did to her ex-boyfriend will shock you to your core and make you see love in a whole new way. If this touching story of love and overcoming struggles moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Elena was vomiting on the cold sand of Newport Beach at 4 in the morning, with trembling legs, an acidic taste in her throat, and a knot of despair that burned into her soul. The beach was empty, except for the driver parked in the distance, discreetly watching her on Andrew Blackwood's orders. 5 months pregnant with a man who had disappeared, without even asking if she needed anything, she felt her life had been reduced to morning sickness, humiliation, and fear. The cold ocean. Breeze hit against her sweaty face as she leaned on a rock, trying to catch her breath. At 27, she had completed 3 semesters of law school before abandoning everything to care for her sick mother. And now, alone, she had nothing but debts and a pulsating womb full of promises that consumed her. The unplanned pregnancy had arrived like a storm, dragging away the last vestiges of her financial and emotional stability. 3 months earlier, when she discovered she was expecting a baby, she ran to Jason's apartment to share the news. She found the place empty, with a cold letter on the kitchen table. "Eleanor, I received a job offer abroad that I can't refuse. Don't try to find me. Take care." Not even an apology, not a word about the future growing inside her. He simply disappeared, as if he had never existed. Since then, Elena had been working double shifts at the rehabilitation hospital, collecting blood-stained sheets, cleaning rooms where powerful men learned to live with their limitations. It was a job that paid little, but gave her access to basic health insurance. Each day was a battle against fatigue, morning sickness that extended into the afternoon, and the constant feeling that she was sinking into a bottomless pit. It was in this state of vulnerability that she met Andrew Blackwood. He was the most imposing presence in that place, always sitting silently near the window of the presidential suite, watching the distant helipad as if he could climb into it and disappear. His black hair, always perfectly arranged, even after weeks in the hospital, the short beard maintained by private nurses, and the dark glass eyes made him an almost cruel, untouchable figure. At 34, heir to an empire that extended from steel to oil, from real estate to telecommunications, Andrew had lost the movement of his legs in a helicopter accident that nearly killed him. The accident happened on a sunny morning when he was flying to a business meeting inland. The aircraft fell from the sky like a wounded bird, and he woke up 3 weeks later, discovering that his life had been split in 2, before and after the wheelchair. But there were rumors whispered through the hospital corridors, stories that staff told in hushed voices during coffee breaks. Some said it wasn't an accident, that someone had sabotaged the aircraft. Others whispered that he himself might have been behind it, trying to escape a fate worse than death. Some believed that powerful enemies within the family empire had orchestrated everything, tired of his autocratic decisions and ruthless business methods. Eleanor heard these stories with a mixture of fascination and repulsion. How could someone be so powerful and yet so vulnerable? During the first weeks, she observed him from a distance, noticing how he rejected any attempt at approach from other staff members. He treated everyone with a cold, distant politeness, as if he were an exiled king forced to live among commoners. But there was something in his eyes, a pain that went beyond the physical, that intrigued her. In the early morning hours, when she cleaned the rooms, she sometimes caught him awake, staring at the ceiling with an expression of anguish that made him seem younger, more human. It was in these moments that she felt a strange pang in her chest, as if she recognized something familiar in him, the desperation of someone who had lost control over their own life. It was on one of those rainy dawns that everything changed. Eleanor was pushing the cleaning cart down the corridor when she heard a deep voice coming from the presidential suite. "Can you bring me some water?" She hesitated. It wasn't her job to attend to patients, but there was something in the tone of voice that prevented her from ignoring the request. She filled a glass with cold water and knocked on the half-open door. "Come in," he said, without looking in her direction. Eleanor approached the bed, smelling the expensive masculine perfume mixed with strong medications. When she extended the glass, their fingers touched for an instant, and she felt a shiver run through her body. It was then that for the first time she saw his eyes falter with pain. It wasn't just the physical pain of dead legs, but something deeper, more devastating. "Thank you," he murmured, and for the first time since arriving at the hospital, his voice didn't sound like an order. Elena nodded and backed away, but at the door, without knowing why, she turned and whispered, "It will pass. The pain always passes." He stared at her intensely as if trying to decipher a puzzle, and she ran out, her heart racing, not understanding what had happened between them in that moment, suspended in time. That night, Andrew couldn't sleep. Elena's phrase echoed in his mind like a disturbing mantra. "It will pass. The pain always passes." There was something about the way she said it, with a melancholic certainty that only comes from someone who intimately knows suffering. He lay staring at the ceiling until dawn, thinking about those tired eyes and the rounded belly she tried to hide under the loose uniform. Over the following days, Andrew began to observe her with an attention he himself couldn't explain. He noticed how she walked slowly through the corridors, one hand always supporting her lower back, her face pale with fatigue. He saw how she rejected the snacks that other staff members offered, claiming lack of appetite, but he knew it was lack of money. He discovered that she worked double shifts, arriving at the hospital at 6 in the morning and leaving only at midnight. There was something about her that deeply disturbed him. Perhaps it was the way she didn't look at him with pity, as everyone else did. Or perhaps it was the silent strength that emanated from her gestures, even when she trembled with exhaustion. Andrew was used to women throwing themselves at his feet, attracted by power and fortune. But Elena barely noticed his presence, too focused on her own battle for survival. One morning, after a particularly difficult night, where phantom pain in his legs prevented him from closing his eyes, Andrew made a decision that would change the course of both their lives. He called his personal lawyer, Dr. Marcus Taylor, a man who knew all the dark secrets of the Blackwood Empire. "I need information about a hospital employee," said Andrew, his voice carrying a coldness that hid the inner storm. "Elena Reynolds. I want to know everything about her, family history, financial situation, and especially who is the father of the child she's expecting." Dr. Taylor, accustomed to his client's eccentric requests, asked no questions. 3 days later, a complete dossier was on Andrew's desk. Elena had been born and raised in East Garfield in the outskirts of Chicago, daughter of a seamstress and a construction worker who died when she was 15, leaving the family in a desperate financial situation. She abandoned her law studies at Northwestern when her mother was diagnosed with cancer, dedicating herself entirely to medical care until her death 6 months earlier. The father of the baby was Jason Miller, an advertising executive from a wealthy family whom she had met at a corporate event where she served as a waitress to supplement her income. They dated for 4 months, and she believed she had finally found someone who loved her for who she was, not for what she could have. When she discovered the pregnancy, Jason disappeared from her life without a trace, except for a cold letter and an emptied bank account. But there was something in the report that made Andrew's blood boil. Jason hadn't simply fled his responsibilities. 3 weeks before disappearing, he had sought a lawyer specializing in family matters, showing interest in assuming paternity of the child. He had even visited apartments to rent, planning a future with Eleanor. What changed everything was a phone call recorded in the archives of Jason's company. Someone had contacted him, offering a substantial amount for him to disappear from Elena's life. The amount was too tempting to refuse. $500,000 deposited in an offshore account in exchange for his eternal silence. Andrew closed the dossier with trembling hands. He knew exactly who had made that call, because the order had come from himself. He had seen Elena months before when she worked as a waitress at a Blackwood Holdings event. She had served coffee to him with the same professional discretion as always, but something in her way of walking, in the silent sadness of her gaze, had haunted him like a fever. At that time, Andrew was still walking, still the man who made empires tremble with a simple glance, but there was a corrosive loneliness in his life, an emptiness that neither power nor money could fill. When he learned that Elena was pregnant with another man's child, it consumed him with hatred and desire, with an intensity that frightened him. Driven by an irrational jealousy and the sick need to control her, Andrew had bought Jason's disappearance, ensuring that the child would never have another protector besides him. It was a cruel and calculated plan, born from the obsession of a man accustomed to having everything he desired. Now, trapped in a wheelchair, observing the woman he had, manipulated struggle alone against the world, Andrew felt the crushing weight of his choices. Each time he saw Elena falter from exhaustion, each time he noticed her hands tremble with weakness, a part of him died of remorse, but an even larger part burned with desire to possess her, to become the center of her existence. It was then that he conceived an even more audacious plan. If he couldn't have Elena through love, he would have her through desperation. If he couldn't seduce her with his charm, he would offer her the only thing she really needed: security. But everything would have to seem like a commercial agreement, a cold transaction between two people who had nothing to lose. Andrew called Dr. Taylor again, this time with a request that left the lawyer speechless. "I want to make her a marriage proposal," he said, his voice carrying a determination that was frightening. "A convenience contract, with all the necessary legal clauses. She needs financial security. I need a wife who gives stability to my corporate image." Dr. Taylor tried to argue about the insanity of that plan, but Andrew had already decided. He knew Elena was desperate, that the medical bills and pregnancy expenses pushed her closer to the abyss. She would have no choice but to accept, and he would finally have the opportunity to keep her close, to protect her in the distorted way his wounded mind considered love. Dr. Taylor appeared at Elena's door on a rainy Thursday morning when she had just finished her night shift. He wore an impeccable Italian suit and carried a leather briefcase that seemed to cost more than her annual salary. Elena recognized him immediately. He was Andrew Blackwood's personal lawyer, that man who whispered in the businessman's ear during medical visits, "Ms. Reynolds, could I speak with you for a few minutes?" His voice was polite, but there was something in his eyes that made her feel a chill down her spine. Elena looked around the empty locker room, calculating if there were staff nearby in case she needed to call for help. "It's about a proposal. That might interest you," he continued, noticing her hesitation. They sat in a corner of the hospital cafeteria, away from curious ears. Dr. Taylor opened the briefcase with precise movements, revealing a document of several pages. "My client, Mr. Andrew Blackwood, would like to make you a marriage proposal," he said, as if discussing the purchase of a property. Elena choked on her coffee. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Her hands trembled as she placed the cup on the table. The idea was so absurd that she couldn't process it properly. Andrew barely spoke to her. They only exchanged polite greetings when she cleaned his room. "It's a convenience contract," explained the lawyer, flipping through the pages. "My client needs a wife who conveys stability to the company's shareholders." After the accident, his public image was shaken, and investors question his leadership ability. A pregnant wife, someone who demonstrates that he still has future projects, would be strategic for his business. Elena felt as if she were in an absurd play. "And what would I gain from this?" she asked, trying to keep her voice firm despite her racing heart. "Complete financial security, housing in one of the family properties, lifetime medical coverage for you and your child, guaranteed private education for the child, and a monthly allowance that would allow you to never have to work again." Dr. Taylor slid a specific sheet across the table. "The values are detailed here." The numbers Elena saw made her dizzy. It was more money than she could dream of earning in a lifetime. But there was something deeply disturbing about that proposal. Why me? There are thousands of women who would accept this without thinking twice. "My client has his reasons," the lawyer replied evasively. "He observed your dedication to work, your strength of character. He believes you could form a functional partnership." Elena flipped through the contract with trembling hands. The clauses were detailed and cold like an instruction manual. There would be no sexual obligations or public displays of affection beyond what was necessary to maintain appearances. She would have her own suite in the mansion, freedom to come and go as she wished, and the right to a substantial pension if the marriage was dissolved. But there was a clause that made her stop breathing for a moment. If she died for any reason, Andrew would get full custody of the child. "Is this normal in contracts of this type?" she asked, pointing to the paragraph. "Considering that my client will assume all financial responsibilities for the child, yes, it is a standard legal protection," replied Dr. Taylor, but avoided her gaze. "Naturally, we hope it will be merely a formality." Elena closed the contract, feeling nausea that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. There was something sinisterly artificial about that proposal, as if she were being manipulated by forces she couldn't understand. "I need time to think." "I understand, but I should inform you that my client needs an answer by tomorrow. There are urgent business matters that depend on this decision." Dr. Taylor put the documents back in his briefcase. "I can say it's a unique opportunity. Someone like Mr. Blackwood would hardly make a similar proposal again." After the lawyer left, Eleanor sat in the empty cafeteria staring at the rain running down the windows. Her mind was a whirlwind of contradictory thoughts. On one hand, the proposal represented the solution to all her financial problems. On the other, there was something deeply disturbing about the way everything was being conducted. That night she couldn't sleep. She paced around the small apartment she shared with 2 co-workers, calculating and recalculating her options. The medical bills were piling up. The money barely covered basic food, and she knew she wouldn't be able to work much longer as the pregnancy progressed. At 3 in the morning, she made a decision that would change her life forever. She put on her uniform for the last time and headed to the hospital, not to work, but to find Andrew and look him in the eyes while accepting the proposal. She needed to understand what kind of man was capable of offering marriage to a stranger through a lawyer. She found him awake, as always, staring at the window that faced the helipad. When she entered the room, he slowly turned the wheelchair as if already expecting her. Their eyes met in a tense silence that seemed to carry years of unspoken words. "I came to give my answer," said Elena, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. "I accept your proposal, but I want you to look me in the eyes and tell me, why me? What's the real reason?" Andrew was silent for a long moment, studying every feature of her face as if trying to memorize something precious. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower and more human than she had ever heard. "Because you're the only person who looks at me as if I were still a man," he said, and there was so much vulnerability in those words that Elena felt something move in her chest. "And because your child deserves to have a father who can protect him from everything, even if that father is imperfect." In that moment, looking at that powerful man reduced to confessing his wounded humanity, Elena understood that she was about to enter an emotional labyrinth from which she might never be able to escape. But for some reason she couldn't explain, that didn't frighten her as much as it should. The civil wedding took place on a Saturday morning at the most discreet courthouse in Newport Beach. Eleanor wore a simple navy blue cotton dress that disguised her 6-month belly, and Andrew wore a dark suit that made him look even more imposing in the wheelchair. The only witnesses were Dr. Taylor and Martha, the housekeeper of the Blackwood mansion for more than 20 years. Throughout the ceremony, which lasted less than 15 minutes, Elena felt as if she were watching someone else's life. When the judge asked if she accepted Andrew as her husband, her voice came out stronger than expected, but her hands trembled when signing the documents. Andrew, for his part, maintained a neutral expression, but she noticed how his fingers clenched on the arm of the chair every time she spoke. There was no kiss, no celebration, no toast. They simply left the courthouse like 2 people who had sealed a business deal. But when Andrew held her hand to place the simple white gold ring, Eleanor felt an electric current run up her arm, and by his eyes, she knew he had felt the same. The Blackwood mansion was even more impressive than she had imagined. Built on a private peninsula, the property seemed to float above the sea, with its glass walls reflecting the sky and water in an infinite dance of light. It was 3 stories of modern architecture, surrounded by tropical gardens that descended to a private beach where waves gently broke on the white sand. Martha, a 50-year-old woman with grey hair pulled back in a perfect bun, received Elena with a mixture of curiosity and maternal protection. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Blackwood," she said, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she knew more about that marriage than she let on. "Please call me Elena," she asked, embarrassed by the formal title. "I'm not used to this change yet." "It will take time," replied Martha with a gentle smile. "Changes always take time. But Mr. Andrew chose well. I can see strength in your eyes." Eleanor was led to her suite on the second floor, a spacious and luxurious space with a view of the sea. There was a king-size bed with silk sheets, a closet larger than her old apartment, and a marble bathroom with a hot tub. Everything was perfectly arranged, as if she were an important guest, not the new lady of the house. The first days were filled with heavy silence and mutual strangeness. Andrew stayed in his office on the ground floor, surrounded by security guards and nurses, conducting virtual meetings with executives around the world. Elena wandered the immense corridors, feeling like an intruder in a palace that was now officially her home. She discovered that Andrew woke up before 5 in the morning and worked until late hours. His meals were served in his office, and he only went out for physical therapy sessions or to swim in the heated pool that Martha explained had been built especially for his rehabilitation. But gradually, small gestures began to create cracks in the cold wall between them. Elena noticed that Andrew liked strong, bitter coffee, so she began to personally prepare his morning drink, adding a pinch of cinnamon, as her mother used to do. He never commented on it, but she noticed that he always finished the entire cup, something he didn't do with coffee prepared by the staff. Andrew, in turn, began to provide small attentions that demonstrated attention to the details of her life. When he learned that she had back pain, he had a special orthopedic chair installed in the living room. When Martha mentioned that she wasn't sleeping well, he provided a special mattress for pregnant women and pillows of different shapes. 1. Night. Elena woke up thirsty and went down to the kitchen. She found the light on in the office and saw Andrew hunched over piles of documents, his hair disheveled, and an expression of exhaustion that made him look older. She prepared a chamomile tea and took it to him without saying a word. "Thank you," he murmured, looking at her with an intensity that made her blush. "You didn't have to." "I know," she replied, but didn't move away. "Why do you work so much? Is it because of the company?" Andrew was silent for a moment, considering whether he should answer. "When you lose control over your own body, you try to compensate by controlling everything else," he finally said. "It's a way of staying relevant." There was a vulnerability in this confession that touched something deep in Eleanor. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone," she said softly. "Your value isn't in your legs." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Do you really believe that?" "Yes," she replied, and realized it was true. "I've seen you conduct meetings where men twice your size trembled with fear. I've seen you make decisions that affect thousands of people. That hasn't changed because you're in a wheelchair." That night they talked until dawn. Andrew spoke about the challenges of leading a business empire while facing his own physical limitation. Elena told about her interrupted dreams, about the law school she had to abandon, about the pain of losing her mother, and finding herself completely alone in the world. It was the first time they really saw each other as people, not as parts of a cold contract. And it was in this conversation that Elena began to realize there were layers to Andrew that she had never dreamed existed. He wasn't just the ruthless businessman that the media described, but also a man who carried deep wounds and a loneliness. That echoed her own. When she finally went up to her room, Eleanor lay in bed with a racing mind. For the first time since signing the contract, she didn't feel like a well-paid employee, but like a woman who had had an intimate encounter with a fascinating man, and that frightened her more than any legal clause could. From the floor below, she could still hear the soft sound of Andrew's wheelchair wheels on the marble floor and realized that he wouldn't be able to sleep either. There was something happening between them, something that transcended the limits of the agreement they had made, and both knew they couldn't pretend forever that this was just a marriage of convenience. The sexual tension between them grew like a silent storm, fueled by furtive glances and forced proximity. Elena began to notice details that disturbed her. The way Andrew's arm muscles contracted when he maneuvered the wheelchair, the smell of his cologne when she passed near his office, the intensity of his gaze when he thought she wasn't looking. Her nights became restless, populated by dreams that left her embarrassed when she woke up. She dreamed of him standing strong, dominating, pushing her against the glass walls of the mansion during the night storms that lashed Newport. She dreamed of his hands running over her body, his hoarse voice whispering words she didn't dare repeat even to herself. Andrew, for his part, lived in a private hell. He desired Elena with an intensity that consumed him, but hated himself for wanting to possess her without being able to be, in his distorted mind, a complete man. He spent hours staring at the sea, repeating to himself that loving meant losing. Control and vulnerability was something he had sworn never to allow again, but there were moments when the mask fell. One morning, while Eleanor was arranging flowers in a vase in the dining room, he observed her in silence. She wore a yellow cotton dress that enhanced the gold of her skin, and her loose hair danced in the breeze that came through the open windows. When she leaned to reach a higher branch, the fabric molded to the curve of her breasts, and Andrew felt a wave of desire so intense that he had to close his eyes. "Are you okay?" asked Elena, noticing his tense expression. "Yes," he lied, but his voice came out hoarser than intended. "Just back pain." Without thinking, Elena approached and placed her hands on his shoulders. "Can I help?" She began to gently massage the contracted muscles, and Andrew shuddered under her touch. It was the first time she had touched him with intimacy, and he felt as if every cell in his body was on fire. "Elena," he murmured, his voice carrying a warning, "don't do that." "Why not?" she asked without stopping her movements. "I'm just trying to help." "Because you don't understand what you're doing to me," he replied, abruptly turning the chair to face her. His eyes were dark with desire, and she felt the air leave her lungs. "You don't understand how hard it is to have you around, touching me, caring for me, and not being able to—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The silence between them vibrated with unresolved sexual tension. Eleanor felt her body respond involuntarily, a wave of heat running through her skin. She was 7 months pregnant, with a changed and heavy body, but under Andrew's hungry gaze she felt more desirable than ever before. "Andrew," she whispered, not knowing exactly what she wanted to say. "Go," he said, closing his eyes as if it were physically painful to look at her. "Please go before I do something that we both might regret." Elena obeyed, but her legs were trembling when she left the room. She spent the rest of the day avoiding him, but couldn't get the expression of naked desire she had seen in his eyes out of her mind. That night, lying in bed, she touched herself thinking of him, imagining what it would be like if he could reciprocate the desire growing inside her. The following days were of mutual avoidance and growing tension. They barely spoke beyond what was strictly necessary, but the atmosphere of the mansion seemed charged with electricity. Martha noticed the change and began to observe them with concern, recognizing the signs of a dangerous passion blossoming between two people who were fighting against it. One stormy night, Eleanor was awakened by a strange sound coming from downstairs. She descended silently and found light coming from Andrew's room. The door was ajar and she could hear muffled groans. Her first instinct was to run to help, thinking he might be ill. She peeked through the door crack and saw him crying silently, trying to lift his body out of the wheelchair with the strength of his arms. He was fighting against his limitations with a desperate determination, trying to support himself on the bed, but his legs weren't responding. When he finally gave up, he fell to the floor like a wounded bird, his body convulsing with contained sobs. Elena couldn't stand still. Without thinking of the consequences, she ran into the room and knelt beside him. "It's okay," she murmured, putting her arms around his shoulders. "It's okay, I'm here." Andrew trembled against her, his face hidden against her neck. She could feel his tears wetting her skin, and her heart broke for the pain he carried. "I would give everything to be able to touch you," he murmured, the words coming out like a confession torn by force. "I would give everything to be able to be the man you deserve." "You already are," she whispered, caressing his hair. "You already are the man that I—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but he understood. Their eyes met in a moment suspended in time, and she saw in them not only desire but something deeper and more frightening. Love. He loved her, and she was beginning to love him too, despite all the strange circumstances that had brought them together. "Elena," he murmured, raising a trembling hand to touch her face. "You can't love me. You can't allow yourself to love a broken man like me." "Who said you're broken?" she asked, covering his hand with hers. "You're the strongest man I know, strong enough to protect me, to take care of me, to make me feel safe, for the first time in years." That night she helped him back to bed and stayed by his side until he fell asleep. When she finally returned to her room, she knew she had crossed a line from which there was no return. It was no longer just gratitude or convenience. It was love, complicated and intense, growing between two people who should be strangers, but who recognized each other as wounded soulmates, seeking healing in each other. And she knew that sooner or later they would have to face what was happening between them, however frightening it might be. The discovery that changed everything happened on a rainy afternoon, when Elena was organizing the documents of her new life. Martha had left a copy of the marriage contract on the office desk, along with other papers she needed to sign. While leafing through the documents, a loose page caught her attention. It was an addendum to the original contract, written in complex legal language, but a specific clause made her stop breathing. In the event of the death of the contractor, regardless of the cause, the total and irrevocable custody of the minor will be under the responsibility of the contracted, without possibility of contestation by blood relatives or third parties. Elena read and reread that clause, feeling the blood freeze in her veins. It wasn't just a legal formality, as Dr. Taylor had explained. It was an absolute guarantee that, if she died, Andrew would keep her child forever. The way it was written suggested that it had been carefully planned, not just a standard precaution. With trembling hands, she searched for more documents, rummaging through the office drawers. She found a folder marked with her name, filled with personal information that left her in panic. There were photos of her working at the hospital, detailed medical reports about her pregnancy, and even records of her financial movements from the last few months. But what shocked her most was finding a sealed envelope addressed to her, with instructions to be opened only in case of emergency. Inside was a handwritten letter from Andrew, dated the day before the wedding. "Elena, if you're reading this, it means something happened to me and you need to know the truth. I loved you from the first moment I saw you, long before the accident. I was responsible for Jason's disappearance. I paid for him to vanish from your life because I couldn't stand the idea of seeing you with another man. I know it's unforgivable, but I would do it all again to protect you and your child. The money was deposited in an account in your name. Use it as you wish, but please don't hate me for trying to ensure that you two never want for anything." The letter fell from her hands as if it were on fire. Elena felt the world spin around her, her legs giving way until she had to support herself on the desk. Andrew had destroyed her previous life in a calculated and cold manner, manipulating her like a piece in a game she didn't even know she was playing. At that moment, she heard the familiar sound of wheelchair wheels approaching. Andrew entered the office with a relaxed expression, but when he saw the documents scattered on the desk and Elena's pale face, he immediately understood what had happened. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying a fear she had never heard before. "I can explain." "Explain." Her voice came out like a muffled scream. "You destroyed my life. You brought the disappearance of my child's father. You manipulated me when I was most vulnerable." "I protected you," he replied, trying to approach, but she backed away as if he were poisonous. "Jason was a coward. He would have abandoned you anyway. I just accelerated the process." "You had no right," Elena shouted, tears streaming down her face. "You had no right to decide for me, to control my life that way." "I had the right to protect the woman I love," said Andrew, his voice breaking. "I had the right to give your child a father who would never abandon him." "You don't love me," she spat the words as if they were poison. "You possess me. There's a difference. Love isn't control. It isn't manipulation. Love is choice, and you took away any possibility of choice from me." Andrew closed his eyes as if the words were physical blows. I know I did wrong. I know I'm a bad man, that I don't deserve your forgiveness, but everything I did was out of love, out of fear of losing you. Fear of losing me. Elena laughed bitterly. You never had me to lose. You had a fantasy, a projection of what you wanted me to be. But the real woman with the right to choices and dignity, that one you never knew. She began to gather the documents with frantic gestures. I'm leaving. I'll get my things and go. I don't want anything of yours anymore. I don't want to live in this lie anymore. You can't go, said Andrew, and there was desperation in his voice. You're 8 months pregnant. You have nowhere to go. You have no way to support the child. Alone. I'd rather die trying than live as your doll, she replied, heading for the door. I'd rather my child grow up poor but free than rich, and the child of a lie. Elena, wait. Andrew maneuvered the chair to block her exit. You don't understand. I can change. I can be better. I can learn to love you the right way. No, she said, her voice firmer than she felt. You had your chance. We had months to build something real, and you chose to maintain the lie. You chose to treat me like property, not like a person. She pushed the chair aside and ran out of the office, leaving Andrew alone with the wreckage of his exposed manipulation. He stayed there amid the scattered papers, finally understanding that he had lost the only thing that really mattered to him. Elena locked herself in her room, packing a small suitcase with the clothes she had brought from her previous life. Each piece of expensive clothing that Andrew had bought for her remained in the closet, as symbols of a life she was rejecting. She would only take what was truly hers. But as she folded her few clothes, she felt a strong pain in her lower abdomen. It was different from the normal pains of pregnancy, more intense, more urgent. She tried to breathe deeply and calm down, but the pain returned with even greater force. When she looked down, she saw a blood stain spreading on the light fabric of her dress. Terror took over her when she understood that something was seriously wrong. Her escape would have to wait. First, she needed to save her child's life. "Andrew!" she shouted, momentarily forgetting all the anger. "Andrew, I need help!" From downstairs, she heard the sound of the wheelchair moving rapidly through the corridors. Despite everything she had discovered, despite all the betrayal, he was still the closest person, and she needed him to protect the life growing inside her. When he entered the room and saw the blood, his expression changed instantly. All the discussion was forgotten in the face of the medical emergency. "We're going to the hospital," he said, picking up the phone to call the helicopter. Now. While they waited for transport, Eleanor clung to Andrew's arm, the physical pain momentarily overcoming the emotional one. "If anything happens to me," she murmured, "promise you'll take care of him. Promise you'll love him as if he were your own child." "Nothing's going to happen to you," he replied, but his voice trembled. "I won't let it." It was a promise he would do everything to keep, even knowing that it might be too late to regain the trust of the woman he loved. The helicopter flight to the hospital lasted 15 minutes that seemed like an eternity. Eleanor was lying on the improvised stretcher, her hands intertwined with Andrew's, who didn't let go for even a second. Her contractions were getting stronger and more frequent, and the bleeding had increased in a worrying way. "It's okay," Andrew murmured, caressing her sweaty hair. "Now you're strong, our son is strong, you'll both be fine." Elena could barely speak due to the pain, but she noticed how he said, "our son." Despite all the betrayal, despite all the manipulation, there was something genuine in the way he referred to the child. Perhaps it was the only real thing amid so many lies. At the hospital, a medical team was already waiting for them. Dr. Henry Morgan, the obstetrician who had followed Elena's entire pregnancy, examined her quickly, and his expression became grave. "We need to do an emergency C-section," he announced. "The baby is in fetal distress and the placenta is detaching." "It's too early," whispered Elena, panic taking over her. "He's only 8 months old." 8-month babies have excellent chances of survival, the doctor reassured. "But we need to act quickly." As they prepared her for surgery, Andrew held her hand tightly. "I'll be here when you wake up," he promised. "I won't leave here for anything." "Andrew," she murmured, fighting against the effect of the pre-anesthetic. If something happens to me, the letter you wrote, I understood. I don't agree, but I understood. Nothing's going to happen, he repeated, but there were tears in his eyes. I won't let anything happen to you. The surgery lasted 2 hours that were the longest in Andrew's life. He stayed in the waiting room, praying to gods he didn't believe in, bargaining with the universe for a second chance. If Elena and the baby survived, he would change. He would be honest. He would be the man she deserved. During the wait, Martha arrived at the hospital with a worried expression. "How is she?" she asked, sitting next to Andrew. "I don't know," he replied, his voice broken. "She found out about Jason. Found out that I paid for him to disappear. She hates me, Martha, and she's right to." Martha observed him in silence for a moment. "You really did that?" she asked, although she already knew the answer. "I did," he admitted. "I did it because I couldn't stand to see her with another man. I did it because I'm a selfish and controlling man who doesn't deserve anyone's love." "You did it because you're afraid," Martha corrected gently. "Afraid of loving and being abandoned again. But that doesn't justify what you did." "I know," murmured Andrew. "I know I destroyed everything. But if she survives, if the baby survives, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to fix what I broke." Finally, Dr. Morgan appeared at the door of the waiting room, still wearing his surgical gown. "Mother and baby are fine," he announced, and Andrew felt as if he could breathe again for the first time in hours. The boy was born weighing 5 pounds and 4 ounces. He'll stay in the NICU for a few days as a precaution, but he's responding well. "And Elena?" asked Andrew, trying to keep his voice steady. "She's recovering well, lost a bit of blood, but nothing serious. You can see her in a few hours when she's out of recovery." Andrew asked to see the baby first. In the NICU, through the glass of the incubator, he saw his son for the first time. He was small, with reddish skin and fine dark hair. His eyes were closed, but his tiny hands moved as if trying to grasp something. "He's perfect," murmured Andrew, tears flowing freely down his face. "He's absolutely perfect." A nurse approached. "Do you want to give a name for the temporary registry?" Andrew thought for a moment. He and Eleanor had never discussed names, more proof of how artificial their relationship had been. "Michael," he finally said. "Michael Blackwood Reynolds." When he was finally able to see Elena, she was awake but still drowsy from the medications. Her eyes met his, and for a moment all the anger seemed suspended by the relief of being alive. "The baby?" she asked, her voice weak. "He's fine, it's a boy. I called him Michael, I hope you agree." Elena smiled weakly. "Michael, it's a beautiful name." She was silent for a moment, then whispered, "Thank you for bringing me here in time." "You don't need to thank me," Andrew replied. "It was my obligation." "No," she said, looking him directly in the eyes. "It wasn't your obligation. You did it because you care. Despite everything, I know you care." Andrew approached the bed, carefully taking her hand. "Elena, about what you discovered. About Jason. I know I have no excuse. I know you have every right to hate me. But I want you to know that every second we spent together was real for me. My love for you, my love for Michael, that's the only true thing in all this mess." Elena closed her eyes, tears silently flowing. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she murmured. "I don't know if I can trust you again." "I know," he replied. "But if you give me a chance, just one chance, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the man you and Michael deserve." "How?" she asked, opening her eyes to look at him. "How can you fix something like this?" Andrew took a deep breath. "First, I'll tell the whole truth. No omissions, no manipulations. You'll know exactly who I am and what I did. Second, you'll have complete freedom to decide whether to stay or leave. There will be no more contracts, no more financial blackmail. Third, if you decide to stay, it will be because you chose to, not because you were forced." Elena studied him in silence for a long moment. "And if I choose to leave?" "Then I'll respect your decision," he replied, although each word was like a dagger. "I'll ensure that you and Michael have everything you need, but from a distance. You'll be free." It was the first time Andrew had offered true freedom, without strings or conditions, and paradoxically, It was also the first time Elena seriously considered staying. Not out of fear, not out of necessity, but because she had seen something genuine in him during those hours of crisis. "I need time," she finally said. "I need to think. I need to recover. I need to get to know my son. But I won't leave. Yet, at least not until we have that honest conversation you promised." It was more than Andrew dared hope for. "Thank you," he murmured. "Thank you for giving me this chance." As Elena fell asleep, Andrew remained beside the bed, watching her breathe, silently promising that he would do everything differently from then on. There was a long journey ahead, but for the first time he had hope that he could regain not only forgiveness, but the love of the woman he had almost lost through his own stupidity. The next 10 days in the hospital were a strange dance of approach and distance. Elena was recovering well from the surgery, but her relationship with Andrew oscillated between moments of genuine tenderness and silences laden with hurt. They spent hours in the NICU, watching Michael through the glass of the incubator, and in those moments they seemed like a real family. Andrew kept his promise of brutal honesty. During the long afternoons at the hospital, he told everything. How he had seen her for the first time at the corporate event, how he had become obsessed with her, how he had investigated her private life even before offering the marriage. He revealed the sordid details of the payment made to Jason, the exact amount, and even the veiled threats that ensured the man would never return. "You want to know what shames me the most?" he said one afternoon, as they watched Michael being fed through a tube. "It's not having paid for Jason to disappear. It's having felt pleasure in doing it. At that moment, I felt powerful, as if I were protecting you from someone who didn't deserve you. But in reality, I was just eliminating the competition." Elena listened to everything in silence, processing each confession as if it were a piece of a macabre puzzle. "Why are you telling me all this?" she asked. "Some things I would never discover on my own." "Because if we're going to try to build something real, it has to be based on truth," he replied. "Even if that truth is ugly, even if it makes me look like a monster." "You're not a monster," said Elena after a long silence. "You're a man who had too much power and never learned to deal with vulnerability, but that doesn't excuse what you did." It was in this complexity that Elena struggled. There were moments when she looked at Andrew carefully holding Michael's tiny hand and saw a loving father. There were others when she remembered how he had manipulated her life and felt a rage that suffocated her. The decisive conversation happened one night when Michael finally left the NICU. They were alone in the room, with the baby sleeping in the hospital crib between them. Elena was breastfeeding for the first time, and Andrew watched with an expression of admiration and melancholy. "I dreamed of this," he murmured. "I dreamed of seeing you with our son in your arms. But in my dream, you smiled at me. You were happy." "I could have been happy," replied Elena, caressing Michael's fine hair, "if you had given me the chance to choose this for myself, if you had trusted that I could love you without being forced." "Would you have chosen me?" he asked, and there was a childlike vulnerability in the question. "If I had been honest from the beginning, if I had simply asked to get to know you, better would you have given me a chance?" Elena thought for a long moment. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe not at first. You were intimidating, powerful, from a completely different world than mine. But there was something about you that intrigued me. In the moments when you lowered your guard, when you were just a wounded man, not the ruthless businessman, I felt something." "And now?" he asked. "After everything you've discovered, after all the lies, do you still feel something?" Elena looked at him, really looked, as if seeing him for the first time. "I feel anger," she said. "I feel betrayed. I feel that you stole my dignity and my right to choose. But also—" She hesitated, as if the next words were dangerous. "I also feel that you're the only person who really sees me, not as a victim, not as someone who needs pity, but as a strong woman who can be your equal." "You are my equal," said Andrew with intensity. "You're stronger than me in many ways. You faced poverty, illness, loneliness, and never lost your humanity. I had all the power in the world and used it to hurt the person I loved most." At that moment, Michael woke up and began to cry. Instinctively, Andrew extended his arms. "May, I?" he asked. Elena hesitated for a moment, then carefully placed the baby in Andrew's arms. Seeing that powerful man holding her son with such delicacy, whispering words of affection, made something move in her chest. "I want to try," she said suddenly. "I want to try to build something real with you. Not because of the contract, not because of the money, but because I believe you can be better, because I believe we can be better together." Andrew looked at her with surprise and hope. "Are you sure? After everything?" "No," she admitted. "I'm not sure of anything, but I am sure that I don't want Michael to grow up in a home full of lies and resentment. I want him to see what real love is, even if we have to learn together how to do it. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve this chance," promised Andrew, tears streaming down his face. "I'll be transparent in everything. I'll learn to love without controlling. I'll learn to trust that you can love me for who I am, not for what I own." "And I'll learn to forgive," said Elena. "Not for you, but for me. Because I don't want to carry this anger forever. Because I want to be free to truly love." They spent the rest of the night talking, establishing the foundations of a completely new relationship. They decided they would go to couples therapy, that Andrew would pass financial control of his own accounts to Eleanor, proving that he trusted in her ability to make decisions. They also decided to renew their marriage vows when Michael turned, one this time out of love, not convenience. But there was still a secret that Andrew kept, something that not even his confessions had revealed. Since the accident, he had undergone experimental treatments to recover movement in his legs. There was a new surgery available, revolutionary but extremely risky, that could partially restore his mobility or leave him permanently tetraplegic. He had decided to have the surgery, but hadn't told Eleanor. He didn't want her decision to stay with him to be influenced by the possibility of him walking again. He wanted her to love him as he was in the wheelchair, vulnerable and imperfect. As he watched Elena sleep with Michael in her arms, Andrew made a decision that would change the course of their lives. He would have the surgery, but before that, he would surrender, completely to the love that was blossoming between them. He wanted Elena to know him as a man, not just as a convenience husband, before anything could change. The following week, when they returned home with Michael, Andrew had organized a surprise that would definitively seal their new life together. He had completely remodeled the baby's room, but more importantly than that, he had destroyed all the contracts, all the clauses, all the documents that made them a commercial agreement. From that moment on, they would simply be Andrew and Elena, two wounded people learning to truly love each other, together raising a boy who would be the symbol of their mutual redemption. The following months were a slow and careful rediscovery. Eleanor and Andrew navigated the first months of parenthood while rebuilding their relationship on completely new foundations. Couples therapy revealed layers of trauma and abandonment that both carried, and slowly, they began to understand the roots of their destructive behaviors. Elena discovered that her need for extreme independence came from the fear of being abandoned. Again, as she had been by her father in childhood and by Jason during pregnancy, Andrew confronted his compulsion for control as a response to the trauma of the accident, when he lost control over his own body and developed an obsessive need to control everything around him. Have you noticed that we're both people who were broken by life and are trying to fix ourselves in each other?" said Elena one morning, while breastfeeding Michael on the veranda overlooking the sea. "Maybe that's exactly what we need," replied Andrew, observing her with a tenderness that she was learning to recognize as genuine. Two broken people who fit into each other's cracks. The physical intimacy between them grew naturally. It began with casual touches, Andrew caressing Elena's hair while she breastfed, her massaging his tense shoulders after long days of work. It evolved to prolonged hugs, soft kisses, and finally, on a full moon night when Michael was sleeping soundly, they made love for the first time. It was different from anything Eleanor had imagined. Andrew touched her with a reverence that made her feel precious, whispering words of love that seemed torn from the depths of his soul. He used his hands, his mouth, all the body he could move, to show her that being incomplete didn't prevent him from being completely hers. "I love you," he murmured against her sweaty skin after they both found satisfaction in each other's arms. "I love you in a way I didn't know was possible." "I love you too," she replied, and this time the words came out without fear, without reservations. "I love the man you are, not the man you think you should be." But there was a shadow that hung over their newly discovered happiness. Andrew had scheduled the experimental surgery for the following week and still hadn't told Elena. Each day that passed, it became more difficult to find the right moment to reveal his decision. The truth came out accidentally. Eleanor found the medical exams on Andrew's office desk, along with documents about the surgical procedure. When she read about the risks, 40% chance of partial recovery, 35% chance of no improvement, 25% chance of complete paralysis, she felt her blood freeze. "When were you going to tell me?" she asked that night, entering his room with the papers in hand. Andrew closed his eyes, knowing that the moment he feared had arrived. "I didn't want you to be afraid." "Afraid?" Eleanor's voice rose an octave. "You could die in this surgery, Andrew, or become completely paralyzed, and you didn't think I should know." "I didn't want your decision to stay with me to be influenced by the possibility of me walking again," he explained. "I wanted you to love me as I am now." "You're an idiot," said Elena, but there were tears in her eyes. "I already love you as you are now. You don't need to risk your life to prove anything to me." "It's not for you," said Andrew softly. "It's for me. I need to try. I need to know that I did everything I could to be the man you deserve." "We already have the man we deserve," insisted Eleanor, sitting on the bed beside him. "You don't need to risk yourself this way." "I need to," he repeated, taking her hands. "But if something happens, if I don't survive, or if I get worse, I want you to know that these last few months have been the best of my life. You and Michael gave me a purpose I never had before." Elena cried that night, holding him against her as if she could protect him from what was to come. "Promise me one thing," she murmured. "Promise you'll fight to come back to us. Promise you won't give up." "I promise," he said, kissing her forehead. "I promise I'll fight for every day we can have together." The surgery was scheduled for a Monday. On the previous Sunday, they spent the entire day together, creating memories that might have to last forever. Andrew held Michael for hours, whispering to him stories about the Blackwood family, about the empire that would one day be his, about the love he felt for his mother. "If I don't come back," he said to Elena as they put the baby to sleep, "I want you to rebuild your life. I want you to find someone who can love you the way you deserve." "Don't talk like that," she begged. "You'll come back. You have to come back." That last night before the surgery, they loved each other with a desperate intensity, as if they could imprint the sensation of each other on their souls. Each touch, each kiss, each whisper was a promise and a farewell. The next morning, as the doctors prepared Andrew for surgery, he held Elena's hand and said, "If I can walk again, the first thing I'll do is dance with you. I'll take you to the veranda. I'll put on music and we'll dance under the stars." "And if you can't?" she asked, trying to be strong. "Then we'll find other ways to dance," he replied with a smile. "Because what matters isn't how we dance, but that we dance together." When the doors of the surgical center closed, Elena stayed in the waiting room with Michael in her arms, praying to all the saints she knew. The surgery would last 8 hours, and each minute would be an eternity. Martha arrived to keep her company, bringing coffee and words of encouragement. "He'll be fine," said the housekeeper. "I've never seen Mr. Andrew fight for something like he fights for your love." "He doesn't need to fight," murmured Elena. "He's already won. He already has us. He just needs to come back." While waiting, Elena wrote a letter to Andrew, pouring onto paper all the feelings she hadn't been able to fully express. She wrote about how he had changed her life, about how she had learned to love through pain, about how she wanted to grow, old beside him, regardless of whether he was in a wheelchair or not. When she finally handed the letter to a nurse to give to him when he woke up, Eleanor knew she had found the words that defined her love. It wasn't a love that needed perfection, but a love that found beauty in vulnerability, strength in weakness, and eternity in the most fragile moments. The wait continued, But for the first time since learning of the surgery, Elena felt peace. She had said everything she needed to say. Now she just had to wait to see if fate would give them the chance to build the future they both desired. 12 hours later, Dr. Henry Morgan emerged from the surgical center with a carefully neutral expression. Elena rose immediately, Michael sleeping in her arms, her heart beating so hard that she feared waking the baby. "The surgery was technically successful," said the doctor, choosing his words carefully. "We managed to repair part of the damage to the spinal cord, but the final result we'll only know in the next few days when he fully wakes from the anesthesia." "Will he survive?" asked Elena, her voice barely escaping her throat. "Yes," replied Dr. Morgan with a small smile. "He will survive. As for mobility, that's still unknown. He may partially recover movement, he may not recover anything, or there may be complications we can't predict." Elena spent the next 3 days by Andrew's bedside, watching each breath, each involuntary movement. Michael seemed to sense the tension, becoming more restless than normal. Martha took over the practical care, ensuring that Elena ate and rested, even if only for brief moments. On the 3rd day, Andrew finally opened his eyes. His eyes immediately searched for Elena, and when he found her, a weak smile lit up his pale face. "You stayed," he murmured, his voice hoarse from intubation. "Where else would I be?" she replied, holding his hand. "How are you feeling?" "Like a truck ran over me," he said, trying to make a joke. "But I'm here. I'm alive." "Try to move your toes," asked Dr. Morgan, who had arrived for the post-operative examination. Andrew closed his eyes, concentrating intensely. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, the little toe on his right foot moved. "I saw it," whispered Elena, tears of joy streaming down her face. "I saw movement." In the following weeks, progress was slow but constant. Andrew didn't completely regain the ability to walk, but he recovered some sensitivity and limited movement in his legs. More important than that, he learned to accept his limitations without letting them define his identity. The physical therapy was intense and frustrating. There were days when he could take a few steps with the help of devices, others when he could barely move his muscles. Elena was always by his side, celebrating each small victory and consoling him in each setback. "You don't need to walk to be my hero," she said on a particularly difficult afternoon when he had fallen during a physical therapy session. "You're already my hero exactly as you are." "I wanted to dance with you," he murmured, frustrated. "I wanted to keep my promise." "Then let's dance," said Elena, extending her hand. "Here now." She helped him sit on the edge of the hospital bed, put on soft music on her phone, and began to dance around him, taking his hands and moving them to the rhythm of the music. Andrew laughed for the first time in weeks, understanding that dancing had nothing to do with moving feet, but with moving the heart. 6 months later, they renewed their marriage vows on the private beach of the mansion, with Michael in Martha's arms as witness. Andrew could stand with the help of crutches, but chose to remain seated during the ceremony, holding Elena's hands while they promised each other a love based on truth, not convenience. "I, Andrew Blackwood, promise to love you, Elena Reynolds, not as a possession but as a partner," he said, looking deeply into her eyes. "I promise to honor your choices, respect your strength, and never again try to control you. I promise to be the man you deserve, not the man I think I should be." "I, Elena Reynolds, promise to love you, Andrew Blackwood, in all your forms," she replied, her voice firm and full of emotion. "I promise to forgive your past mistakes and walk beside you toward a better future. I promise to be your partner in strength and weakness, in health and in sickness, in the wheelchair or standing." The kiss that sealed these new vows was different from any other they had shared. It was a kiss that spoke of redemption, of forgiveness, of a love that had survived the lie and flourished in truth. That night, on the glass veranda of the mansion, under a starry sky, Andrew fulfilled his promise. He managed to stand for a few minutes, supported by a crutch while Elena danced around him. It was awkward, imperfect, but it was real. It was theirs. "I love you," he murmured when he finally sat down again, exhausted but happy. "I love you too," she replied, nestling in his arms. "I love the man you've become. I love our family. I love our imperfect and real life." Michael, who had awakened with the music, babbled something that sounded like Dada and Mama, making them both laugh with joy. 2 years later, Elena published her story as a novel, changing the names but keeping the emotional essence of her journey. The book became a phenomenon, touching thousands of people who recognized in its pages the universality of imperfect love, redemption, and second chances. The epilogue showed Elena reading to Michael, now a dark-haired boy with curious eyes, on the same veranda where they had danced. Andrew slept in a nearby chair, a second baby in his arms, a girl they had adopted, the result of their desire to give love to a child who needed a home. And they lived happily ever after, Daddy and... "Mommy?" asked Michael, as he did every night. "They lived," replied Elena, looking at Andrew with a smile. "They lived with truth, with love, with difficult moments and wonderful moments. They lived as real people live, imperfect, but always striving to be better." The sun was setting over the Newport Sea, painting the sky gold and pink. Andrew woke to the voices, smiled at his family, and extended his arms to receive Michael, who ran to him as he always did. There, on that veranda where so many storms had passed, where so many tears had been shed, where so many painful truths had been confronted, blossomed the most beautiful of redemptions, love born of mutual acceptance, growing through forgiveness, and becoming eternal in the daily choice to be better for each other. Life always begins, even after the longest night, of darkness. And true love, that which survives the lie and strengthens in truth, is capable of transforming even the most wounded hearts into gardens where new dreams can